February 7th, 1981. In that region of Antarctica, where the sun refuses to show itself to humans for many months of the year, a massive tracked mobile base unit, Omega-12, was slowly moving across the endless sea of ice under an international research mission called Project Black Ice. This unit was nothing less than a ship, a moving fortress of iron. Inside were labs, sleeping cabins, an engine deck, and a control room. A total of 18 people were on board. 11 scientists, 4 survival-trained technical experts, 1 doctor, 1 communication officer, and mission leader Captain Richard Hall, a man who had seen both the Arctic and Antarctica, and whose face held a hardness more frozen than the weather itself. Accompanying them were 2 experienced sledge dogs, Nova and Black, who could smell hidden dangers beneath the ice. The mission's goal was to reach an inland part of Antarctica where, according to satellite data, a massive subglacial lake existed beneath the ground, a lake that no human had ever seen. For the first 10 days, everything remained under control. Data collection, ice core samples, mapping, and lightheartedness. Some people wrote in diaries, others talked about home. But on the 11th day at 2:36 a.m., a heavy vibration from beneath Omega-12 jolted everyone awake. It felt as if the ice had groaned. Alarms blared, and red lights flashed on the control panel. An engineer screamed, "Ground stability is failing." Before anyone could understand what was happening, a massive section of ice collapsed downward, and the front part of Omega-12 was violently jerked, getting stuck on the edge of a deep glacial cavity. The entire base tilted. People collided with walls. Equipment shattered. The doctor immediately began tending to the injured. Captain Richard peered outside, and what he saw turned his blood cold. There were cracks everywhere. The ice was breathing. This was no ordinary area. The radio was turned on, and an SOS was sent, but the only response was static. It felt as if this place was cut off from the rest of the world. For the next 6 hours, they tried to extricate the base, but every movement caused the ice to break further. Finally, the captain made the most difficult decision. Omega-12 is no longer safe. They would have to abandon it and set up a temporary camp on the ice above. Only essential supplies were taken. A 25-day ration, tents, medical supplies, limited fuel, flares, and survival gear. When they stepped outside, Antarctica revealed its true face to them. Minus 49 degrees Celsius temperature, biting winds, and endless whiteness. For the first 2 days, the team held themselves together. They were confident that their location was being tracked via satellite and that a rescue would come. But on the 3rd day, the communication officer quietly revealed that their beacon signal had also died. On the 4th day, the first argument broke out over food. On the 5th day, one scientist began to break down mentally, repeatedly claiming he could hear voices beneath the ice. Nova was constantly barking in one direction, as if she sensed something wrong. On the 7th day, a blizzard, a storm arrived that destroyed all their planning. The wind speed was so intense that tents began to fly away. In that darkness, a technician lost his way. In the morning, his frozen body was found. This was their first death, and at that moment, everyone realized that this mission was no longer history, but a battle to stay alive. Rations were reduced further, and conversation became sparse. Everyone began to shrink into their own fear. Captain Richard wrote only one line in his diary that night. "We are alone here." And somewhere far away, beneath the ice, Omega-12 was slowly taking its final breaths. After Omega-12 was buried under the ice, every day spent at the camp was no longer a date on a calendar, but a test of body and mind. As the 8th day ended, the wind direction changed, and the temperature dropped even further. While breathing in the minus 55-degree cold, lungs felt as if they were being pricked from the inside. People now spoke less to each other, because every word spoken exhausted their energy. Upon waking in the morning, Captain Richard would first count the people, then the rations, and then ask himself if everyone would be able to stay alive today. Conditions were most difficult for Dr. Allison, because injuries were increasing every day while medicines were decreasing. The first signs of frostbite began to appear on many people's fingers and feet. Skin began to turn blue and then black. On the 9th day, meteorologist Julian stated that there was a possibility of a terrible storm for the next several days. And if that happened, this camp would not survive. That same night, Nova suddenly began barking loudly and clawing at the ground, as if she felt something shifting underneath. By morning, new cracks appeared in the ice. This meant that the place where they had stopped was also not safe, but no one was in a condition to move. On the 10th day, for the first time, hunger truly began to show its effects. People's hands began to tremble, heads felt heavy, and the power to think began to diminish. One scientist accidentally dropped his food, and the fear on his face at that moment silenced everyone. No one said anything, but everyone understood that food was now not just energy, but life. On the 12th day, Black suddenly became lethargic. His walking became unsteady. The doctor said that the cold and lack of calories were killing him. He wasn't just a dog. He was the final warning of danger. On the 13th day, an engineer suggested that they try to go back to Omega-12 to retrieve more supplies. But going down meant surrendering themselves to the crevices. Nevertheless, 3 people descended using ropes. Inside was darkness, the sound of breaking metal, and a structure groaning under the pressure of the ice. They retrieved some batteries and an extra radio, but while coming out, a rope broke and one scientist became trapped below. His scream reached the top, but no one could save him. The people standing above just listened in silence. That moment became a permanent crack in everyone's soul. The doors had been left open. On the 14th day, the storm finally arrived. Winds began to blow at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour. The tents were shaking, as if they were made of paper. People huddled inside. For 3 days, they could not step out. During this time, a technician's condition worsened, and on the 3rd night, he passed away. No one had the courage to even take his body outside. He was buried right there under the snow. The aftermath. On the 16th day, when the storm subsided, the world felt completely different. New snow was everywhere, old tracks had vanished, and all sense of direction was lost. Even the maps had become useless. That same day, the communication officer reported that the radio they had recovered could only receive signals, not send them. This news hit them like a sledgehammer. On the 17th day, another mental breakdown occurred when the biologist, Maya, began to feel like she could hear children laughing. She ran out of her tent, and if the captain hadn't caught and stopped her, she would have been lost in the snow as well. Fear was no longer just outside. It was brewing inside their minds. The beginning of the end. On the 18th day, Black stopped walking. He lay down on the snow and closed his eyes. Nova sat beside him. No one said a word, but everyone understood that this was the beginning of the end. On the 19th day, Captain Richard called the most difficult meeting yet. Rations were barely enough for 10 days. There was no sign of rescue. There were only 2 choices: stay and die slowly, or take the risk and head toward an old research zone on foot. Arguments broke out, voices were raised, and accusations were hurled. Ultimately, the decision was postponed because no one wanted to take that responsibility. That same night, another person died in their sleep from the cold. Now, only 14 people remained. The final decision. On the morning of the 20th day, Nova was alone. Black's body was frozen solid. The doctor lowered his head. The death of the dog wasn't just an emotional loss. It was the breakdown of their survival system. Now, every step was a step into the dark. Captain Richard's voice was still firm, but for the first time, fear was visible in his eyes. He gathered everyone and said that if they didn't decide quickly, this ice would swallow them one by one. For the first time, the people standing there realized they weren't just trapped in Antarctica. They were losing to time itself. After the 20th day, the difference between morning and night in the camp vanished. The sun remained only as a pale line, and the sparkle in people's eyes was replaced by a hollow emptiness. Captain Richard finally announced the decision. They would wait no longer. 320 kilometers away was an old Soviet research zone, mentioned in maps as the Vostok Outpost. Perhaps there was a radio there, perhaps some food, perhaps just a wall that could block the wind. But this, perhaps, was their last hope. Out of the 14, only 9 people were fit to walk. The rest were either disabled by frostbite or mentally broken. Dr. Allison stated clearly that those who couldn't walk could not go along. This decision was made not with words, but with silence. Those left behind were given a little extra food and a small radio receiver. No one said goodbye, because everyone knew this was the last meeting. The morning of the 21st day. The departure. On the 21st morning, 9 people set out into the sea of ice. Every person carried the weight of death on their shoulders. For the first 2 days, their bodies kept moving, but their minds were becoming numb. On the third day, a scientist sat down on the path and refused to get up. The captain tried to pull him, but he cried, saying he could not walk any further. After a few moments, he froze right there where he sat. No one looked back. Desperation and loss. On the fourth day, food was almost gone. People were sucking on snow to make water. By the fifth day, the line between human and animal began to blur. On the sixth day, a storm arrived, and they had to pitch a tent while moving. That same night, a man tried to steal food from another, and in the ensuing scuffle, both fell into a crevice in the ice. In the morning, there was only silence. Now only 5 remained. Captain Richard, Dr. Allison, Maya, Engineer Thomas, Nova, the last dog. The final stretch. The 7th day. Maya stopped walking as her feet had turned black. She held the doctor's hand and asked to be left behind. She smiled and said, "Someone has to stay back so the others can move forward." They laid her in the snow and moved on. The 8th day, Engineer Thomas took the wrong direction. By the time he realized it, it was too late. The cold took him silently. Now, only 3 humans and 1 dog were left. The 9th day, Captain Richard fell. His breath was breaking. He told the doctor that if she stayed, everyone would die. For the first time, his voice trembled. Allison moved forward, weeping. The Vostok Outpost. On the 10th day, a broken structure appeared in the distance. Vostok Outpost. But the joy lasted only seconds. Inside, they found that a fire had broken out years ago. The radio was burnt, the food was rotten, there was no help. That night, the captain took out his diary and wrote the final line. "We have come very far, but perhaps not far enough." He did not wake up the next morning. The conclusion: Dr. Allison and Nova were now alone. Knowing she wouldn't last long, she made one last effort. She connected the old radio, sent an SOS signal, and sat down. For hours, nothing happened. Suddenly, faint voices came through the radio. A satellite receiver had caught the signal. Allison smiled and lay down on the ice. Hours later, a rescue helicopter arrived. They found only Nova alive, alongside the frozen body of Dr. Allison. Later, the report stated that Project Black Ice was a failure. But the truth was that Antarctica didn't defeat them. It simply reminded them how small humans are. Even today, a whisper echoes in that snowy silence. Some places are not meant for winning, but only for understanding.